of Chitraketu introduces King Chitraketu as a king who did not have a son, despite the fact that he married 10 million wives. All of them were unable to produce a child, and because of that, Maharaj Chitraketu, even though he was replete in so many other opulences, like loving relatives, um, uh, a kingdom that was well under his control, people that were happy, so all kinds of good qualities. But yet, because he considered it his duty to produce a son, both for the benefit of the kingdom, so that they have a stable ruler after his departure, and also for somebody to continue the tradition of Pitradhan, the offering of the oblations to the forefathers after his death. So in the meantime, Maharaj Angira comes and inquires from Chitraketu about the reason for his sorrow, and Chitraketu talks about it, mentions it. So Maharaj Angira performs a yajna, and the the offering that comes from the yajna, Chitraketu gives to his eldest wife, Shrestha Jeshta. She is described that Jeshta means eldest and Shrestha means foremost in good qualities. And taking that, she Kritidyuti becomes with a child, and very soon she delivers a son. So when she delivers a son, then there is happiness everywhere, and both Kritadyuti and her son become the center of everyone's attention, including that of Chitraketu. So he begins to neglect his other wives, and they feel envious because they are now belittled. Earlier on, they were all sharing in the same misery, but now they are considering themselves to be belittled by Kritadyuti and Chitraketu. So in this envy, they administer a poison to the sun. So that's where we ended. We will start with the last section of the chapter from verse 44 to 61, lamentation of Kritadyuti and Chitraketu. Verse 44, Kritadyuti rajanati shaptinamagam mahat shupteveti sanchantya nirikshya vayacharat grahe. Unaware of the poison administered by her co-wives, Queen Kritadyuti walked within the house, thinking that her son was sleeping deeply. She did not understand that he was dead. Verse 45, Sayanam suchirambalam updharya manishini putramanya me bhadre iti dhatrim machodaya. Thinking that a child had been sleeping for a long time, Queen Kritadyuti, who was certainly very intelligent, ordered the nurse, My dear friend, please bring my son here. So Kritadyuti is glorified as Manishini. So Manishini means one who is very intelligent. So the derived meaning is that it is difficult to distinguish between one who is in deep sleep or one who is dead. And of course, if one is dead for a long time, then there are different changes that happen to the body. But in case of the son, he had just died there, right? So Sukdev Goswami makes this point that how it is difficult even for the intelligent to distinguish between the sleeping and the dead. Right? Now, one does not lament when somebody goes to sleep. but one does lament when one dies. So, what's the difference between the two? The difference is that when one goes to sleep, then after some time one wakes up. But when one goes to die, or when one dies, then one does not wake up. But then if you step back and look at it from a scriptural perspective, that when one dies, when then a person sleeps in one body and wakes up in another. The process of reincarnation. And if you remember in the Sankhya of Lord Kapila, deep sleep is actually compared to death. Right? When the point has been made that at the time of deep sleep, the uh, 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 only by the desire of the super soul, the body is maintained in a way that the jiva can come back in the same body. It's the super soul that manages the whole thing. So the point is that deep sleep is almost like death, other than the desire of the super soul. That by the desire of the super, it's almost like the person dies and reincarnates in the same body. Right? So this point is made over here in a way to substantiate the later on preaching that will be done to Chitraketu and Kritadyuti about the fact that there is no need to lament, that one does not lament when one sleeps for a long time. So similarly, one should not lament because exactly like sleeping, the soul will eventually appear in another body. Right? And the body may be in a different planet, in a different environment, but nevertheless, it's like sleeping. The soul wakes up by the desire of the super soul, either in the same body or a different body. Okay, verse 46. Sashayanam upaprajya drishtva chotaralochanam pranendriyatam bhistyatvam hatasmitya apatat bhuvi. When the maid servant approached the child who was lying down, she saw that his eyes were turned upwards. There were no signs of life, all his senses having stopped, and she could understand that the child was dead. Seeing this, she immediately cried, "Now I am doomed," and fell to the ground. So why does the maidservant says, "Now I am doomed"? Right? Two reasons. One is that in those times, and to some extent even now, the bearer of bad news was condemned. So the maidservant understood that she would have to take this news to the queen. And the queen will forever look at her as one who came carrying the news of the death of her son. And the second reason is that it was earlier mentioned that everybody was very much attached to the son because they were attached to the king and the queen, and they were happily participating in the ecstasy of the king and the queen. So just like later on, Chitraketu and Kritadyuti will experience grief, the maid servant is also experiencing grief, that as if it's the death of her own son or somebody that is very dear to her. Verse 47. Tasya tada karnya Brashtaturam swaram kanatyaha karabhyama ura uchakerapi pravasharajani toyarayatmajanitkam dadarshabalam sahasamritam sutam. In great agitation, the maidservant struck her breast with both hands and cried loudly in regretful words. Hearing her loud voice, the queen immediately came, and when she approached her son, she saw that he was suddenly dead. So the maid servant, she kind of works out a compromise that instead of her carrying this news to the queen and being forever condemned as the carrier of bad news, she attracts the attention of the queen through the lamentation. Right now, of course, the queen does understand that it's the maidservant who is carrying the news to her, but the impact is different because the queen hears the maidservant lamenting. She comes in and she herself firsthand sees that the son is dead. So it says Balam Sahasamritam Sutam. Right. So the child has suddenly died. Right? So suddenly means not that he was alive right in front of her and died, but it also means akala mrityu. That this was not the time for the son to die. Right? For obvious reasons, it's just a child. So you don't expect a child to die. You expect somebody to grow old and die. And also because it's akala mrityu because the child was not sick. The child was happy, healthy, playing, and suddenly it died. Right. So generally, if death is preceded by sickness or illness of some kind, then it gives the family some time to mentally prepare themselves for it. Right? But in this case, there was no prior indication. The child suddenly died. Sahasamratam sutam. Verse 48. Papat bhumau pravritya sucha mumoha vibrastiro yuambra. In great lamentation, her hair and dress in disarray, the queen fell to the ground unconscious. So we see the impact of this sorrow differently in the maidservant and in the queen. So one difference is that the maidservant is a Shudrani. So the word Shudra means one who laments. So now here the lamentation is not unwarranted. It is indeed an event that justifiably it is a cause for lamentation, but the way that they're expressing the lamentation we see is different. That the maid servant is is crying loudly, beating her breasts, etc. Whereas the mother, she's internalizing that sorrow, and by internalizing it, she loses consciousness. So one can understand that the impact on the mother is a lot more severe than the impact on the maidservant. Right? And we can also understand that the queen as a Kshatri, as a Kshatrani, she's internalizing the sorrow. So this is actually considered one of the qualities of Shudras that the lamentation is very public and external. That it does not mean that they should not feel sorrow, but the difference in which the sorrow is expressed. That when a Brahman is exposed to sorrow, then he becomes philosophical. When a Kshatriya is exposed to sorrow, then he becomes angry. And they will look for ways to take revenge or find somebody to blame it. Right? When a Vaishya is exposed to sorrow, then they become distressed. Right? So they become bewildered. But when a Shudra is exposed to sorrow, then it is, so to speak, they are in their element. Because Shudra means one who laments. Right? And when they are exposed to a situation that requires lamentation, it's kind of, as they say in physics, resonance. That by nature, they tend to lament, and when there's a situation that is lamentable, then they are, so to speak, in their element. And we can, I don't have much experience in this country, but in India, I know um, we had situations when people who were you outside the house, we had like a semi kind of a slum area, and there were huts, the temporary huts, etc. And every once in a while, you would see there would be this huge uproar, and somebody had done something. Either a husband and wife quarrel, and the husband beat the wife, and the wife would come out in the street, and she would cry and yell, or sometimes if there was a death in family, then they would run up and down the street crying. So very public display of lamentation. In the Queen's case, we see that it is more controlled. Verse 49. Tato nirpanta puravartino jana nara chanarya chanishchamya rodanam agatya tulya vyasana suduktitas tas chavyalikam prurudhakratagshaha. O Parikshit, O King Parikshit, hearing the loud crying, all the inhabitants of the palace, both men and women, being equally aggrieved, they also began to cry. The queens who had administered the poison also cried pretentiously, knowing full well their offense. So, why did they cry pretentiously? Well, because they're also mothers. They're women, and at least for a certain point of time, they were ecstatic at the appearance of the child. So the reason is that uh, the result of sin is that the person becomes devoid of all human-like qualities. So this quality of empathy, of feeling the sorrow of others, is quality of an evolved human being. Okay? But because these co-wives, they were now contaminated by the sin of killing the child, their ability to express emotions has now been withdrawn. So even the positive emotions like happiness, joy, sympathy, they're all the symptoms of a person who is soft-hearted. Right? So sometimes it's said that the quality of one who is a sthitapragya is that he is unaffected by the happiness and distress and honor and dishonor. That the quality of a sthitapragya is stoic. He just stays he just does not get affected. But actually, that is going against the nature of the soul, because Krishna is Rasaraj. Krishna is the fountainhead of all emotions. And the souls the jivas being qualitatively the same as Krishna, are also carrying those emotions in them. And as the souls get closer to Krishna, their ability to enjoy the opulence of the emotions also increases. So a soul that is derived of the ability to experience emotion is going against its intrinsic nature. Right? And the Anandamay part of the soul is the sweetest part of the soul. So when Bhagavad Gita says that one is unaffected by happiness and distress, it is not saying that one should become devoid of emotions. What is it saying? That one should not come under the sway of these emotions. So the example given is that of the difference between Dronacharya and Arjun. So Arjun lost his son in the battlefield, Abhimanyu, and we see he's expressing very, very strong grief and anger. Right? So not that Arjun is bewildered. He has heard the Bhagavad Gita from Krishna. Not only has he heard it, he in the 18th chapter he says that I understand what you're saying and I'm ready to act according to your instructions. Right? So he understands all the 18 chapters of the Bhagavad Gita. Now when he starts expressing this anger and grief, then Krishna might chastise him. That didn't you hear? Second chapter, verse 47, what I said about the Sthita Pragya. But factually, what it means is that Arjun did not allow this grief to cloud his execution of his duty. It did not bewilder him. Arjun used his grief and his anger to further his service to Krishna. So that is the difference. Like when a person is Sthita Pragya, does not mean that he's devoid of emotions. What it means is that he is not under the sway of the emotions. Yeah. In this chapter, in verse 43, the co-wives are described as Darun Chetashaha, that they are hard-hearted, right? And here we see the manifest result of Darun Chetashaha, that they're deprived of the ability to feel sorrow and empathy, which is the emotion at this time. But it also means that they will be derived of the ability to feel joy, real joy, happiness, ecstasy. Why? Because Darun Chetasa. The nature of sin is that it takes the soul away from its intrinsic possession. So that's why Sukdev Goswami says, Velikam Ruruda, that pretentiously they cried. They were not able to cry. Seeing the child dead, seeing the parents lamenting, even then they were unable to feel any sorrow. So pretentiously they tried to show those emotions. Okay, verse 50-51. Shutva mritam putram alakshanatakam Vinasat drishti prapatan skalanpati Snehanubandhai ditya suchabrasham Vimurchito nuprakrati tvijervatah Papatabalasya sapadmule mritasya visrashta sirohuamra Dirgham swasan Bashpakaloparodato Nirudakanto Nasa Sakabhasitum. When King Chitraketu heard of his son's death from unknown causes, he became almost blind. Because of his great affection for his son, his lamentation grew like a blazing fire. And as he went to see the dead child, he kept slipping and falling on the ground. Surrounded by his ministers and other officers, and the learned Brahmanas present. The king approached and fell unconscious at the child's feet, his hair and dress scattered. When the king, breathing heavily, regained consciousness, his eyes were tearful and he could not speak. So, at this time, the cause of the death of the son is not known. Alakshita Antakam. Right? So, this was essentially the prediction of Angira, that Shoka, that uh, uh, he would be the cause of Ashoka, which is happiness, and Shoka, which is lamentation. So, for a brief time that he came, he was a cause of happiness to the king and Kritadyoti. Now he is the cause of, of the lamentation for both of them. Verse 52, Patim nirakshoro susharpitam tada pratam chabalam sutam meka santitam tanasya rajni prakritescharitrujam sati dadana vilapachitrata. When the queen saw her husband, King Chitraketu merged in great lamentation and saw the dead child, who was the only son in the family. She lamented in various ways. This increased the pain in the cores of the hearts of all the inhabitants of the palace, the ministers and the brahmanas. So the lamentation of Kritadyuti increased on seeing the lamentation of Chitraketu. Right? So, and while the brahmanas and the ministers did not have the same depth of attachment to the child as the king and queen, they were nevertheless very attached to the royal couple. And seeing them deep in sorrow, their pain also increased. Right? So, in this way, a wave of sorrow engulfed the palace and would very soon sweep over the entire kingdom. Verse 54. Aho vidata tvamativa balisho yastvatmasrashte apratirupamehase parenu jivatya aparasya yamriti viparyayascheta tamasi dhruva para. Alas, O Providence, O Creator, you are certainly inexperienced in creation. For during the lifetime of a father, you have caused the death of his son, thus acting in opposition to your creative laws. If you are determined to contradict these laws, you are certainly the enemy of living entities, and you are never merciful. So here we see the difference between how a devotee and one who is not a devotee deals with adversities. So, an advanced devotee considers all adversities as the mercy of the Lord, and they try to see what is the lesson for them. Right? So, when the word considering adversities as the mercy of the Lord, so the broader understanding is that the mercy of the Lord is always for your benefit. And so when it is said that adversities are the mercy of the Lord, then the underlying message is that one needs to see what is the benefit that is one is deriving from this adversities. Right? What is the kind of purification or detachment or realizations that that the Lord wants one to take. Right? That's the real meaning of mercy. Now, one who is not, and so this is the quality of an advanced devotee, right? At the highest scale of advancement. Now, one who are not so advanced, when they are exposed to adversities, they may not consider it as the mercy of the Lord. Right? So what do they consider it? They consider it as a reaction to their own activities. So they don't fault the Lord. Right? They're not able to say this is the mercy of the Lord. That thank you so much. Right? So they're not at that level, but they don't condemn the Lord. Right? So they simply tolerate it, expecting the eventual mercy of the Lord. Right? This is the classic Tatyanukampam Susumikshama, right? That when one is facing repeated adversities, they just wait patiently, right? Eventually expecting the mercy of the Lord. Now, those who are kanishtas, right? Those who are neophyte devotees will find fault in the in the in the Lord, but nevertheless they will continue in their spiritual life. Right? So they will say that I don't know why it happened. Right? So they do not see this as a lesson, as a mercy of the Lord. They will not see it as their own, the result of their own action. So it will bewilder them, but because they're engaging in devotional practices, they will continue to engage in that devotional practices. However, those who are not devotees, they will immediately condemn the Lord. Right? So Vishwanath Chakravarti gives a nice interplay in this verse. So he says that, so even though the speaker of this verse is not given, it just says, Aho Vidatas Tamativa Bali. So, right, alas, O providence. But Vishwanath Chakravarti says that this verse is spoken by Kritadyuti. Right? So he says that Kritadyuti considers the Lord as the cause of the mercy. So she gives the Lord some advice for his own benefit, so that he does not repeat the mistake he has done with her. So she first states the premise. Right? So what does she say? She says, Balishaha. She says, my dear Lord, you are inexperienced and childish. Why is that? Atma Srishti Aprati Rupam. Because your Atma Srishti, your Srishti, your creation is Aprati Rupam. It has been made improperly by you. How is it improper? Pare no jivati. So the elder lives. Aparasya mratir. And the child dies. So this is opposite to what the laws of creation should be, wherein the children should outlive the parents. So that when the children when the children outlive the parents, then they can become parents. So they can procreate, and in this way, the srishti, in this way, the creation continues. But then one may say that how can you criticize the Lord? He's fully independent, right? So Kritiduti says that viprayas cheta, that this is out of a false sense of independence, you choose to act in a way that contradict your creation. And because of that, I consider you to be my enemy. So Tomasi Dhruva Para. Dhruva means certainly, no doubt about it. Para means enemy. So doing what is wrong shows that you are inimical to us and I should be inimical to you. So this captures the essence of the mentality of non-devotees when they're faced with undesirable situation. Firstly, they will consider the Lord to be responsible. And they don't consider themselves, they don't consider anything else. immediately they will blame the Lord. Right? Now, how do they reconcile the fact that the Lord is inflicting cruelty on them? One of two ways. One way they say is that the Lord has limited powers. So maybe he means well, but his ability to control things in this world is limited. And you see that in the Karma Mamshi, right? The Karma Mamshi says that the Lord is there, but is subservient to karma. Karma is supreme. Lord has limited powers, right? So that's one way. Other way, they say that the Lord is by nature envious. He is inimical to them. Right? And the root of this is the fact that their experiences and the realizations is based on only how they feel. So if you notice over here, Kritadyuti is not lamenting for the child. She's lamenting for herself. Right? So it's one of the philosophers says that um, if you were to go to uh, um, what is it, like the place where the, like a cremation ground. If you go to a cremation ground and you listen to the lamentation of the people, almost all of them will be lamenting for themselves. The wife will say to the husband, "You have deserted me. I'm going to be all alone," right? Or sometimes the children may be lamenting for the father or the mother, saying that you have made me an orphan and you have deprived me of this. So it's the nature of one who is too much in the material conception, is that they think of themselves. Kritadyuti is saying that you have made me suffer. And so these four things, that they consider the Lord to be responsible, they reconcile it by either considering the Lord to have limited powers or the Lord to be inimical to them. And their focus of attention is only themselves. And interestingly, the first 3 points, the there was a rabbi in the Jewish faith, and his son died at a very young age from some disease, and he went through this philosophical questioning that my child was young, had not committed any sins, but yet he died. And he said there are two reasons that I can now. He's speaking from the Jewish perspective. And he said there are only two reasons that I can understand. That one is that the Lord is not good, because he allows bad things to happen, so the Lord is bad. And the second I can understand is that the Lord is good, but he has limited powers. And then he finally concludes that I cannot accept a Lord that is not good. So then I accept the fact that God has limited power. So he actually, based on that, he wrote a book which became a bestseller. I think the title of the book was um, When Bad Things Happen to Good People. And actually, even now, it's one of the top sellers. So, I mean, of course, I've condensed this into very, very small, but he writes well, and he goes through this whole philosophical discourse. So, Prabhupada writes here that here the queen blames supreme providence for her son's death. Following the creative laws, a father should die first and then his son. If the creative laws are changed according to the whims of providence, then providence should not be considered merciful, but must be considered inimical. Actually, it is not the creator, but the conditioned soul who is inexperienced. He does not know the subtle laws of fruitive activity, and without knowledge of these laws of nature, he ignorantly criticizes the Supreme Lord. Here, verse 55. Nahi kramascheta iha mrityu janmanoh शरीरनं वस्तु तदात्मकरं मे यः स्नेहपाशो निजसर्गवृत्तये Swayam kritaste tamimam vivarshachasi. My Lord, you may say that there is no law that a father must die in the lifetime of his son, and that a son must be born in the lifetime of his father, since everyone lives and dies according to his own fruitive activity. However, if fruitive activity is so strong, then birth and death depend upon it. There is no need of a controller or God. Again, if you say that a controller is needed because the material energy does not have the power to act, one may answer that if the bonds of affection you have created are disturbed by fruitive action, no one will raise children with affection. Instead, everyone will cruelly neglect his children. Since you have cut the bonds of affection that compel a parent to raise his child, you appear inexperienced and unintelligent. So Kriti Duty is being uh, is following Nyaya. So one of the angas of Nyaya is to the logician will, before others can contradict, the logicians will contradict themselves, and they will contradict themselves so that they can explain that contradiction. Right. So in the previous verse, Kritadyuti had put in a premise that the child died before the father, and if the Lord is allowing it, he is inexperienced, right? Now, now she is presenting certain arguments on behalf of the Lord. So she is saying that the Lord may say that what is my offense? Since I only give birth and death according to the karma of the jiva. There is no law that states that the son should outlive the father. All this is dependent on their respective karma. So to that Kritiduti responds that if all this is ordained by karma, then karma is supreme, not you. So what is the role that you play? So that she says that the Lord might respond that karma is just a law. Somebody needs to enforce it. Just establishing a law does not mean anything. So I am that person that enforces that law. The law of karma is there because of my control. So Kritidyuti responds to it and say, okay, I accept that you are the one because of which this law of karma is being activated. And you have also created bonds of affection. So, what are some of the bonds of affection? Between a husband and a wife, between the parents and the children, between the children and the parents. And why have you created this? Only for the purpose of expanding your creation. Right? In the Bhagavatam, it's mentioned in third canto that Visarga, the secondary creation, the roots of Visarga is the the lust between a man and a woman. So before Shatrupa and Sambhuvanu appeared, Brahma was trying to increase the size of the population. He created the four Kumaras, they became celibate. Lord Shiva in yoga, Narad Muni in bhakti. He was getting frustrated. Only when he created sex, strong sex desire in these two, then it's mentioned that at that time Visarga actually blossomed. So Kritidyuti is saying that you are the one who has created this kind of affection. Now, if the affection will only between a man and a woman to have conjugal pleasures, even then the population would not increase. But what she's saying you have cleverly done is couple this with the affection of the children. Right? So there is a desire to there is a desire to enjoy conjugally, and there is also an intense desire to have children to satisfy the parental affection. So, because the Lord has cleverly created these two things, His creation is expanding, right? Because otherwise, um, uh, if they had, and this to some extent you see in the current day and age, that men and women are more interested in sexual pleasure, not so much in becoming parents. That's why in many countries the population is declining, marriage is going out, because in a way they are at the expense of one, they're suppressing one and growing others. So what Kritidyuti is criticizing is that in order to increase your creation, you have invested in us these two concurrent pleasures. But when others will witness me, and they will see that how I am suffering because of the death of my child, they will say to themselves that rather than exposing ourselves to the possibility of suffering, let us curtail our affection, because this affection is the cause of distress. So better for us to not marry, or even if we marry, better for us to not have children. Or even if they have children, they will neglect the children and let them die. Right? So in this way, they will protect themselves against the possibility of future distress. So what is the criticism that Kritidyuti is leveling at the Lord? That you are acting in this way by taking away my son from me. The whole kingdom will witness my lamentation and suffering. And they will say, let us not be like Kritidyuti and Chitraketu. Let us not have any children. So you are actually acting against your own best interest, which is just to increase the size of your creation. And thus you appear to be inexperienced and unintelligent. And so we see that she's building this logic almost impeccably. Prabhupada in the purport writes, a wonderful purport by Prabhupada, that in this verse, karma has been stressed on the basis of karma mimamsha philosophy, which says that one must act according to his karma and that a supreme controller must give the results of karma. The subtle laws of karma, which are controlled by the supreme, cannot be understood by ordinary conditioned soul. Therefore, Krishna says that no one can understand him and how he is acting. That is the statement of Brahma Samhita, Karmani Nirdhati Kintu Cha Bhakti Bhajam. And essentially, that if one takes to bhakti, then one is freed of the law of karma. One should take to devotional service, and that will give happiness. Okay. So this particular process that Kritidyuti is following in Nyaya, it is known as Hetvabhas. So Hetvabhas literally means the fallacy of presupposition. So the fallacious reference here, so the hetu or the reasons appear valid, but it is not. And so how does Hetvabhas means? That she makes an incorrect premise and builds a logical inference on it. So if somebody was to examine the logic that Kritidyuti is presenting, they cannot fault it, because she's building a very logical inference chain. but the premise that it is built on is invalid. So logicians sometimes do it, that they will build elaborate inferences and they will confuse the other person because the person will try to look at the cause and effect and the inferences. But the premise on which they're building it is incorrect. So what is the premise of Kritadyuti? She assumes that the only purpose of the Lord is to increase the creation. And so she makes that the premise and then builds upon it. Now, partially it is true. Krishna does create this universe so that Brahma can populate it, right? So we see that we see that in how Brahma is trying to fulfill his service to the Lord by increasing the population. But the fallacy here is that she's confusing the secondary reason with the primary reason. So while one can say, yes, the Lord does endeavor to increase the population of the universe, but that is not his ultimate purpose. His real purpose for doing this creation is to allow the jivas to return back to the spiritual world. So Kritadyuti is confusing the primary on the secondary purposes of the Lord, and therefore is very convincingly condemning him, right? So he's saying, you want to increase the population of this universe, but you have created the situation in which people will not have children, and therefore you are unintelligent, right? If you just take that, yes, true. But now if she adds a premise to that, before that, she says that the only reason you create this universe is for conditioned souls to take to devotional service. That is why you allow the conditioned souls to take birth so that they can take. So now they will follow a different line of reasoning, which ultimately Narad and Angira will follow with her. But at this point, she's basically following the Hettvabhas, right? That the Hetu or the cause she's taking the wrong in the chain of cause and effect. She's taking an intermediate stage as the ultimate cause, and therefore incorrectly condemning the Lord. Okay, so we won't be able to complete this chapter. There are just 5 verses here, but maybe let's see. Verse 56. त्वं तात नर्हसि च मां कृपणामनाथां त्यक्तुं विचक्ष्वा पितरं तव शोकतप्तम् अञ्जस्तरे मा भवता प्रजदुस्तरं यदा स्वान्तं नायाहे अकरुणयमेन दूरम्. My dear son, I am helpless and very much aggrieved. You should not give up my company. Just look at your lamenting father. We are helpless because without a son, we shall have to suffer the distress of going to the darkish hellish regions. You are the only hope by which we can get out of this dark region. Therefore, I request you to not go any further with the merciless Yama. So Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur says that Kritadyuti thinks, why am I gossiping with the foolish Lord? Better for me to talk to my son. So she turns to the body of her son, assuming that the soul is still there, and says, oh son, by your efforts we can cross over the hell through the offering of oblations to Pitras. Now the son might say that I am being forced by Yamraj. And Kritadyuti says, do not go with the merciless Yamraj. Right? So again, you will see that Kritadyuti does not really have any sorrow for the son. The verse is just saying that this is what is going to happen to us. We are helpless. Without a son, we will go to the darkest region of hell. You are a hope by which we can go out of this dark regions. So you should do this. So this set of verses gives the nature of a materialist. Right? So just to summarize, What does a materialist do when there is reversals? First is they get bewildered. Second is they blaspheme the Lord. Third is that they condemn his devotees. Right. So akarunena yamena. So here Kriti is condemning Yamraj. Right. So not very strongly, but she's essentially saying that this merciless Yamraj. Akarunena yamena. Yeah. Fourth is that primarily think about themselves. What will happen to me? What will happen to your lamenting father? And the fifth thing is they lose faith. So we see that Kritadyuti, she stops talking to the Lord. Earlier on, she's criticizing the Lord, but at least she's facing the Lord. Now she has given up on the Lord, and she's talking to the Son. So we see in Mahabharata that when Gandhari lost her sons, she cursed Krishna. When Kunti Devi witnessed all the trials and tribulations of her sons, when she saw how her grandchildren were slaughtered, what did she do? She glorified the Lord. Right. When Draupadi saw that when Arjun brought back Ashwatthama from when he had killed his sons, she immediately forgave Ashwatthama. In Chaitanya Charitamrita, we see Srivas Thakur, when there was the Sankirtan going on and his son dies, he strongly instructs his family members, do not lament for the death of the son, because it will interrupt the Kirtan of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. So it is easy to deal with atheistic people about Lord with the use of logic. But those who are sentimentally atheistic, they are difficult to deal with. Right? We see that Kritadyuti is not going into the stage of being logically atheistic. So many times when devotees have discussions, so there are people who are logically atheistic, and they can get them to a point of being agnostic, right? To the point where they'll say, we don't know. But those who are sentimentally atheistic, right? They'll say that, what has the Lord done for me? And I have this problem, I have that problem. All my life I have been kind. Very, very difficult to deal with them. Okay. Okay, so we'll stop at this point. Even though all the next verses do not have any purports, but we'll finish it next time. See if there are any questions or discussions.
Prabhu, if you want to finish it, it's a very short verse. Maybe you can go ahead. We'll ask everybody.
Okay, let's finish it then. It should take a few minutes. Verse 57. Utishtatayme shishavo vyasayas tvamahavayanti nipanandan samavirtam Suktachiram maya sanaya cha bhavan parito Pungshwasthanam piba sucho harana swakana. My dear son, you have slept a long time. Now please get up. Your playmates are calling you to play. Since you must be very hungry, please get up and suck my breast and dissipate our lamentation. So signs of increasing bewilderment. Verse 58, my dear son, I am certainly most unfortunate, for I can no longer see your mild smiling. You have closed your eyes forever. I therefore conclude that you have been taken from this planet to another, from which you will not return. My dear son, I can no longer hear your pleasing voice. So the bewilderment. Previous verse is considering to be alive. In this verse, dead. Verse 59. Sri Sukavacha Vilamtayamritam Putram iti Chitra Vilapanaha Chitrakatir Bhrasham Tapto Mukta Kanto Rurodaha. Sri Sukadeva Goswami continued, accompanied by his wife, who was thus lamenting for her dead son. King Chitraketu began crying very loudly with an open mouth, being greatly aggrieved. Verse 60. Tayor vilaptaho sarve Dampatayo Rurudasvanara Narya Sarvamasiddha Chetanam. As the king and queen lamented, all the male and female followers joined them in crying. Because of the sudden accident, all the citizens of the kingdom were almost unconscious. Evam karshmalamapanam nashtasamyam manayakam gyatva nigranam rishi ajagama sanarada. When the great sage Angira understood the king was almost dead in an ocean of lamentation, he went there with Narada Rishi. So that's the end of the 14th chapter. And next chapter onwards is the preaching. Wonderful chapters 15, 16, the preaching of Angira and Narada. Okay, so let's see if there's any discussion.
Prabhu, one question about the Shrad. He said that you have to have a son to go back, or you don't suffer in the hand of Yamraj. But for devotees, is this applicable?
So this process of Pindadan, etc., it's more or less a part of Karma Kanda. Right? So what does Pindadan do? It elevates the forefathers to Pitraloka. And Pitraloka is it's within the material planet. Actually, it's one of the lowest planets in the amongst the heavenly planets, right? So it's not something that the devotees aspire to even attain, right? So this is more for those who are looking for happiness within the material world.
That means chanting the holy name, doing our sadhana that we do is enough. We don't have to do all this thing.
So for devotees, chanting is. I mean, there are examples that are given, right? When Prahlad Maharaj was praying to Lord Nrsimhadev, he says, please forgive my father, absolve him of the sins. And Nrsimhadev says, already, just because you're a devotee, so many 21 generations or whatever, they're already liberated. So devotion is the most powerful way that one can serve one's ancestors and one's descendants.
Thank you, Prabhu.
Hare Krishna Prabhuji. Oh, sorry, Prabhu. Prabhu. I think you have a question here.
No, you can go ahead, no problem.
Thank you, Prabhuji. Thank you so much, Prabhuji, for the beautiful class. Like it was so amazing to hear that what we commonly hear when people cry and lament, but there is a deep philosophy of their thought process and all that is involved behind it. So in this relation, I have two questions, Prabhu, kind of both related. One is sometimes blaming God, I can understand from their perspective, because he can do it, he can avoid it, but still he allowed it. That anger is understandable. Understand, at least I could see that. But how they can think like God has limited powers? If God has limited powers, why we need to even cry for that innate tendency of that crying comes in? That is one part. And the related question, Prabhuji, like many times people blame, people criticize while doing all this lamentation. But maybe after few days again they continue doing their puja, or they continue. It's not that they're completely leaving it. So are these feelings are really their deep inner feelings, or just uh, like situational tragedy made them bewildered and speak something and again come back to terms after few days?
Sometimes they come back to terms, sometimes they don't. Right? So there are times when I've personally witnessed both situations. I'm not speaking philosophically, but experientially. I've seen both situations where people go through some personal tragedy and they never take to they never take to uh, they never take to any form of devotion after that. So also cumulatively, like so maybe there is one event that happens and then you come back, but there is a trace of resentment that stays. Next time something else happens, then you still come back, but then the trace is stronger there, right? And maybe in the next birth you take birth and you're born with a very strong sense of resentment, right? From building from previous births and um, births prior to that. First question, I think it's fallacious philosophy, but yes, the point you make is correct that because the people work on this premise that if God is all good, then He should not allow bad things to happen, right? So uh, there are tragedies that are really horrendous. Small children dying, or children getting kidnapped and tortured and killed, and very, very heart-wrenching. And then one might say that why does God allow all this to all this to happen? So they just have two alternatives. One is considering that God is not good. There's an evil God who's allowing all this to happen. And the second is that the God has limited power. That why he does not want bad things to happen, but there are things that are beyond his his ability. Right? And then people go both routes. There are people who will think God is bad, and they basically develop that mentality. Or they will think God is good, but God has a limited ability. That's why Prabhupada writes nicely that only by understanding the subtle laws of the nature can one understand how Krishna can be everything. He can be good, but he can allow these bad things to happen. He can be all powerful, but he can still permit these things that apparently seem to contravene his merciful nature. So if I use this phrase, by understanding the subtle laws of nature.
Yes, Prabhu.
Okay, thank you very much. Apologies for going over time. Next week we'll start with a new chapter. वाञ्छकल्पतरुभ्यश्च कृपा सिन्धुभ्य एव च पतितनाम पावनेभ्यो वैष्णवेभ्यो नमो नमः। अनंत कोटि वैष्णववृंद की जय। शिला रूपाद की जय। ताई गौर प्रेमानंद। Hare Krishna. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Prem Kishore Prabhu. And sorry that I took your